Hello, everybody. We are back with the next episode of the Irrelevant Podcast in this sort of divergent thing I've done with my boy Robert right here. I think people have responded well to these new episodes. When I say responded well, I mean that we got a lot of views and the algorithm was boosted. I'm not saying that's the only thing we're after, because we do like talking and whatnot, and we do like talking about ideas. That's probably our favorite thing to do. We talk about this shit for like hours and hours on end,
hmm
right? Um, so tonight, Robert actually picked the topic,
hmm
and it's about more or less, it's like, well, Hegelianism and the philosophies and ideologies that preceded it. So,
and mostly ideologies from the second half of the 19th century and the basically the 20th century. I mean,
yeah,
they're still around today, but kind of their conception and implementation were in the late 1800s and in the 1900s.
yeah, and keep in mind this is not exactly like we're not giving a class. This is just kind of our thoughts on it based on like what we know. We have done some research and whatnot. But just keep in mind like we're not scholars, we're not professors or anything. There's
Yeah.
probably like if you actually want to know about like the actual like roots and you want to study it in a very like um like organized way and get like a bunch of different perspectives. Um, that's what college used to be for.
But anyways,
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess the topics we're going to talk about tonight are going to be like Hegelianism, kind of just a basic overview of what Hegelianism is. And then we're going to talk about some of the
And how it influenced,
yeah,
yeah.
the philosophical descendants. I mean, they're not like these ideologies necessarily weren't directly descended from Hegelianism, but they had influence from Hegelianism. And these are things uh, like socialism in general, and then within socialism, the international socialism, which is basically communism, national socialism, fascism, Nazism, and that's yeah, that's pretty much all we're going to be discussing.
Marxism,
Well,
but
for
that's
the
there's
thing is that they're all related. It's kind of like the difference between the Orthodox and Catholics. How it's there are differences, but they have a common root, and they're not really that much different.
yeah, and exactly they're not really that much different, but like to an outside observer, they can see okay, these people like hate each other's guts. To my view, they seem kind of the same thing. It's kind of like how but it's interesting though because I think that might be true of the Orthodox and the Catholic or like certain religious schools of thought, but I feel like with these like weird esoteric like Hegelian and like Gnostic influenced ideologies,
Mm-hmm.
people actually like I think in the mainstream think that they're not really related,
Yeah, they are
which they are. I know you and
I
I
mean
understand they are.
in school, like public school, we're taught that National Socialism and like Marxism are very different. They're not.
They're not really
For
at all.
example,
Yeah.
Mussolini was a Marxist before he was a fascist.
Yeah, exactly. And we're
I
gonna
mean, I know fascism and National Socialism aren't exactly the same thing,
they're not, and we'll touch about that
but
in a second here.
because I think Mussolini was a fascist. I
Right.
think I don't remember if Franco was a fascist or a national socialist. I think uh I
I know
think
everyone
I
says he's a
think that the
fascist, but I
Nazis
don't really
were
know.
national socialists, but like Nazi was like specifically for a certain type of national socialist. That's what I think.
But
That's
also, well, before we get too bogged down in
yeah.
this, which we're definitely going to come back on this, and I have a couple questions for you because I think you're a little bit more
Yeah.
like I know some of this stuff, but especially when it gets into the specifics, especially with the, you know, whole milk, like supremacist type people,
Yeah.
um, and the tiny mustache man followers,
Yeah.
as Jay Dyer puts it, is pretty funny. Um, so in the tradition of Western philosophy, the biggest question that has come up, arguably, is the problem of change, right? Which is related to the dialectic, right? Like up versus down, chaos versus order, change versus stasis, right? And all these things of just this like people and like the philosophers in ancient Greece debated for centuries about the problem of change. Like, is stuff constantly changing? Is it constant flux, constant chaos? Or is there no change at all? And is just this all like, are we in this sort of determinism, right? And while I think philosophers like Aristotle kind of solved for that problem, in my opinion at least, just because they solve for the problem doesn't mean that the sort of dilemma doesn't still exist among certain peoples and schools of thought. Because obviously, um, what a lot of people like must understand is that these evil ideologies that we saw in the 20th century, like Nazism, communism, and all that kind of stuff, like it has ancient roots.
So could you explain? Well, I mean, you and I, we know why these ideologies are evil, but can you like give like a pretty solid like explanation as to why they're evil?
Well, I would say first and foremost, these ideologies, they're about what you know, right? They're about transcending the natural world or transcending the, you know, menial kind of everyday life. It's about achieving, like these higher states,
Hmm.
right? So that's why it's evil because it's not about something we talked about previously on this podcast. It's not about who is God,
Mm.
right? It's about what do I know? And I think
Yeah.
just in that phrase alone, what do I know, which is like what these philosophies are at
Hmm.
core, that's instantly a problem because it takes the focus off of God and it puts it instantly on you,
Hmm.
right? And you got to remember pride is the root of all sin.
And uh another thing I could say for that, or another thing I could add to it, is that these ideologies, I'm gonna mostly talk about like Marxism and Nazism because I guess they're the most like well known and they're the
Easily.
easiest to kind of like they have the most examples as to like what makes them so like like reprehensible.
And also like popular. Why do
Hmm.
so many
Yeah.
people attach themselves
So
to those?
like with communism, it promotes class warfare. It
Yes.
divides people and it promotes hatred, and some of the hatred is not really like warranted. Like it's like it's unfair hatred. Like you like I can understand why some people would hate another group of people because of maybe that group of people genuinely did something wrong to um the oppressed people. But like for example, uh in the USSR,
Mhm.
the game with the kulaks. The kulaks
Yes.
the
Very
kulaks were
familiar.
basically the peasants that made a little bit of money. They were still like I guess they kind of were like the middle class.
Wait, because they own businesses.
They
That's
own,
that's
but
really
they were the serfs because serfdom ended, and they were kind of allowed to engage in a little bit of capitalism.
free market.
And
You can open up your business.
mhm,
You can privatize like your farm, and you can
yeah.
sell stuff that your farm produces.
And the thing
Yeah.
is that it's it's sad because these people, their ancestors were serfs, and like it's not the exact same thing as slavery, but it's pretty similar. Like it's like a similar effect, like serfdom.
Yeah, I mean, serfdom is not, at least to my knowledge, maybe someone who's more familiar with the history of Eastern Europe. Uh, love you to correct me if I'm wrong, but like I don't think that. serfdom is too much different than like the Western European kind of, like peasant and noble system.
I mean, I know it was
That's how I
war,
perceive
but
it.
anyways, these people came from like a humble situation, and every person desires well, at least most people desire to provide for their families and to work and make a little bit of extra money and provide a better living standard for themselves and the people they care about. And that's what a lot of these kulaks were doing. They weren't the oligarchs, they weren't the tycoons, they weren't billionaires,
They were
they
not
weren't
descended from nobility.
like yes, there may have been like small level, like you know a very poor person gets you know what's it called, wronged by a certain kulak family or
Sure, yeah.
business organization,
Yeah.
but to demonize a class of people who own businesses like who aren't like the monopolistic billionaire tycoons. It's very sad because they're basically just normal, everyday working class people. And what's so evil about it is that these people were demonized. Um,
Well, I think you have to, with that and understanding that, you have to remember the power of propaganda,
yeah.
right?
Well, you
Which
gotta
is
remember
related.
who was at the head of this, Lenin. And
Yeah.
Lenin, we also should talk about Lenin's idea of accelerationism.
Well, right. And so
his
when you
his
were
his fight against the universe itself.
right, and so that's related to ultimately, well, not truly ultimately Hegel. You could technically say it's through Plato and then like was it Heraclitus, right? The problem of
Yeah,
change.
yeah,
Yeah, but that's like a little too far, and I think we don't have to talk about Platonism and
yeah,
Neoplatonism on this
yeah,
episode specifically. Maybe we could talk about it in the future.
yeah.
But Hegel, in terms of like the actual like modern West,
Hmm.
he is kind of like the father of the cringe,
Yeah.
right? And so his teachings are about that like the everyday order that like you see is kind of like fake.
Hmm.
That's like kind of like an illusion, and you need to like transcend beyond that,
Hmm.
right? Through like that's why it's related to Gnosticism,
Hmm.
right? And he also taught about the dialectical materialism,
Hmm.
right? So it's you have the thesis and the antithesis, right? So it's the established order, the ruling
Well,
class ruling over the ruled class or the working class,
there's a
right?
there's
And
another
so
yeah there's
let me let
another
me
okay,
let me
go
finish.
ahead, go ahead, sorry.
And so they fight over material goods, and through the battle of the thesis and the antithesis is created the synthesis, which is the new order. And then from
Hmm.
the new order comes the new thesis and the
Hmm.
new antithesis, right? And they fight over material goods, and then it creates the new
Yeah.
synthesis, right? So it's just you got to remember the key here: constant change, constant flux. It's
So
just all
okay.
chaos.
So how can we tie that in with Lenin and him like spreading like anti-Kulak propaganda
Well, yeah, because
to like encourage a class warfare?
well, right. So I would say like how it's related to like when you read Lenin's writings, he is fundamentally anti-reality. Like
Yeah, yeah.
he is like rebelling against
Hmm.
the world itself.
So, this kind of goes uh back to the Greek philosophers because a lot of the Greek philosophers had slaves.
That's true,
So
yeah.
a lot of I can't really think of any examples, but I know that quite a few of the major Greek philosophers had slaves. And the reason why they were able to engage in philosophy is because they had slaves to do the work for them. They basically
Hmm.
became people separated from the earth. The earth is where reality is. You're digging holes in the ground, you're planting plants. You're not really like
You're
you're
creating, you're making things.
yeah,
You're
you're
using your
constructive.
hands.
You're constructive, and
Yeah,
the thing is with these philosophers is that separated from that, and they're trying. It's kind of like they're picking. the from the tree in the Garden of Eden. You know, it's kind of not as like
It's
it's
related to that, but I
it's
think
but like the problem is
um
that they're like within their like philosophy, they're kind of like going in on themselves because like
hmm.
they they're detached from everyday like manual labor work that they've kind of become so abstract within themselves that they're literally being separated from the dirt, the
Well,
reality.
yes, and that's related to the phrase, take your head out them books,
Exactly. And so
because
and
with
let
there's true
Mhm,
obviously that's that's kind of like
mhm,
we laugh at that and stuff
mhm,
like that and how it's not exactly true, but it has some truth in it of the sense of like you can't right, like you said, you can't get too detached, you can't get too abstract from just the natural order. Like
yeah.
that's
And s-
anti-human. Like
and so like
it's unnatural,
if we look at the type of person that Lenin was, and this also includes Hitler and Lenin, and probably
Mussolini. I
no,
think
but like they kind of had like the millennial mindset of like I'm an artsy person. I don't
right.
have to do no trade job. I'm so abstract and I'm unique and
I don't
it's
need
kind of
that.
like the
Yeah.
it's also ties into the like the midwit like where it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
these people they're separated from Hitler was an artist and and what's his name? Marx and Lenin really didn't have a real job at any point in their life. They had like this egotistical mindset and this kind of this it kind of
Yeah.
fell into
No.
the
And
same
yeah.
trap as like ancient Greek philosophers of like, oh well, they're so detached from the everyday activities that I mean, it's good to think about things higher than yourself sometimes, but the problem is if you never are like if you're never engaged with like actual physical reality, you kind of lose yourself.
Well, that's actually a very interesting thing, and it relates to how how communism people argue ultimately comes from Plato,
Mhm.
right? And so Plato famously was always like he was like really really jacked, right?
Yeah.
As according to what they say, right? And he was very much like because you know how
Was it
communism.
Socrates was also they were athletes, I believe.
I think
I believe
so.
Socrates,
Don't quote me on Socrates, but Plato, I know that's what at least people say of him.
yeah.
But because you got to remember what communism, like the facade that it gives, right? Of like going back to like the like communistic like
Well,
prehistory.
they want a utopia. They
Yes,
want a
but
utopia to where everybody's equal. You don't really have to work. You don't really have to struggle. But the problem is that you have to work more and you have to struggle more.
to get
Because
to that,
no,
yeah.
because the thing is,
But what I was
wait,
gonna
wait,
say,
real
oh,
quick.
I'm
Just like with
sorry.
the ancient Greek philosophers, um, it's about having your slaves. Your slaves are the ones that do all the work for you, and you get to sit up in your lounge and drink wine and create these awful ideologies and just watch the world burn. It's kind of the same thing with Lenin and um I don't want to talk about Lenin the entire time. It's just he's a really well-known person who's kind of easy to spot. Lenin was for all intents and purposes a loser. Like an average man could beat the crap out of him. Like
Yeah.
he was whiny, he complained a lot. But what he had is he was uh like he was well versed in like rhetoric and he knew how to get people riled up
Oh, he's the
and
master
he
of
knew how
that.
to
Yeah.
divide people. But
He's
his
a like what's the word? He's a it's oh stupid dog. Give us 1 second. Oh, the word. Not Denon. Sorry, I was going to say the word.
Mhm,
Lenin was the master demagogue,
mhm,
right? Of just riling up the people,
yeah,
like master of rhetoric. You know exactly what I mean,
yeah.
right? But what I was gonna say earlier was like when you what you're saying about like how this whole like you can't be too abstract, right? And these philosophers come up with these like ridiculous ideas
Mhm,
because of it. But remember how I was telling you about how the ultimate origins of communism, technically speaking, is like Plato. But how communism gives the allure of like the you need to touch the grass.
Mhm.
You gotta not be like that mean, evil, ugly corporate man. You
Yeah,
gotta
yeah.
you gotta be in nature, right?
You
That's
gotta
why
be a punk rocker.
exactly that's part of that, and that's why you have all of like those like nature worshippers because they
Hmm.
feel like the mean, evil, ugly corporate Republican man and the Christianity is like is responsible for all this like urban
Hmm.
disgustingness, which
Hmm.
is literally not.
So
But no, wait,
yeah,
give me one second.
sorry.
And so I feel like what you're saying, like Plato has a little bit of that of like the you need to touch some grass of
Yeah,
like that's a great argument, but can your bench back it up?
yeah,
I
yeah.
know that's like not something he said, but it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah, but like
it's exactly
it's
that.
like how like you can come up with all these crazy ideas, but are you engaged in reality? Like, do you actually work? Like if you're some dude who just sits in his basement all day and just comes up with these crazy harebrained ideas, like I don't really want to listen to you. But if you're someone who puts in the I'm not saying you have to work yourself to death. I'm not saying that work is everything, but if you're not engaged in like a little bit of reality, like I'm just not gonna really take you seriously because you don't have a like you have to
Yeah.
actually grasp reality.
Well, right. I mean, like, are you familiar with how the teachings of Plato and Aristotle contrast?
Mhm.
Right. So, like Plato is like, all right, the way you have to truly see reality is by closing off your senses, and just kind of like like it's kind of that Gnosticism,
Yeah,
weird like meditation stuff.
yeah.
Um, but Aristotle is like, no, the way you actually perceive reality and live life to its fullest is embracing your senses as a gift, right? And going out in the world and experiencing it, right? That's why I think Aristotle is probably my favorite Greek philosopher because of that, because he was like when you actually look at his life, he was a good man,
Mhm.
right? Like he had his wife, he took care of, and like he actually like I said in his teachings, like he talks about the problem of excess and defect and how like you can't have too much, you can't have too little, you gotta have a middle ground, right? And you have to like be able to engage in like you know labor and whatnot.
Yeah,
Like
he was
Aristotle was
engaged.
great.
Yeah, he was Aristotle is better and he's more respected by the church than some of the other philosophers because he is more in tune with reality.
Yeah, and obviously
And
that's not the whole story. I think you guys should obviously read the works of Plato and Aristotle, and I highly recommend like listening to talks like you know done by Tick History, Jay Dyer, all those good channels that I know
even
you guys
Jordan
watch.
Peterson.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
he's
Yeah, but
he's pretty good when it comes to
yeah.
that stuff. Not
So
when it comes to everything.
so another thing I want to point on is with these demagogues and these revolutionary
These
socialistic leaders is that the utopia is not for the common man. It is for the party. It is for the party elite.
yes, because
Mhm.
think about this. Think about how relating it to the dialectic, right,
Mhm.
which is what Hegel talks about. Um, the dialectic, like I mean, they ironically don't even realize it here, is that on one hand, it's about exalting and worshiping the working class man.
Mhm.
Oh, he's like the Chad with the six pack abs. Overall,
He's
he's
he,
he's
he's
just
got he's got the hammer and
yeah,
sickle.
hammer and sickle. He's just trying to help out his poor wife and kids, who's
Mhm.
starving to death because of the policy of the mean, evil, ugly corporate Republican man who can't have no
Yeah.
sex. He's just
Or
jealous.
or
Yeah,
or or if it's in Cambodia, it's the guy who wears glasses and teaches English.
right, exactly. But then on the other hand, oh wait, we actually hate working class people. Working class people are actually dirty, filthy, ugly scum, right?
Mhm.
They're misogynistic, they're
Yeah,
fat,
yeah,
they're ugly.
yeah.
You see how like it
Well,
just serves whatever
so
purpose they're trying to
it's
yeah.
it's funny. It's funny how it's funny when I saw the meme of it's the communist like college person like we need to organize the working class in America and the your average like working class like blue collar American he's like a Protestant Christian.
Wearing the
He like goes
Confederate
fishing
flag.
all
Yeah.
day, wears a Confederate flag.
Yeah,
Like
the meme you said it was
he like hates abortion.
yeah, it was this it was yeah, like the Freedom Tunes. No, 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 it wasn't that. It was like that website, but it was like
Hmm.
like the
Stone
people
toss, I think it was.
something like that. Like the pretentious I'll find the image and I'll flash it on the screen. It's like the leftist and he's like I support the working class. And then you see the actual working class man in the overalls wearing the Confederate flag. He's like, "What? Thanks, pal." And
Yeah,
then he offers his hand out to him and the leftist just like
yeah,
he does not want to shake his hand. Like he
yeah.
literally views this guy as subhuman.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, that's not funny, but
well, like this is the problem is it's it's funny because like communism has a similar problem to as like slave societies have because like in a slave society a person is forced to work in a certain way. Like the person is like
they're held at
they're
gunpoint.
yeah, they're held at gunpoint. They're literally dehumanized and told, "Hey, you need to go work on this farm." And guess what? That's actually like slavery is a moral evil, but it's also like economically like detrimental because these
It's
people
economically how would you say it's economically sterile. You know,
like
because
degenerative.
well, yeah, because you're not actually creating any wealth for
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
society at
and so,
large. Yeah.
with a slave society or a communistic society, these people they're forced to go work on a farm and they're not allowed to own their own private property and to invest. They're not allowed to make decisions. They're not allowed to innovate. They're basically just livestock, and it's just not it's it's just not beneficial and it's detrimental. And communism and slave societies have this same issue. Like if Russia uh, continued to allow its people to innovate and invest and go through the trial and error of starting businesses and go through the hardships of trying to create something new instead of being forced to work on a farm at gunpoint, these countries would be happier and prosperous, and
Well,
they
yeah, because when they say like that's not real communism, what's so ironic is actually is real
no, that is real communism because
communism. Yeah.
because oh, it's not real communism, but the same exact thing happens in every single communist country, and then they blame
They didn't blame it on mean, evil, ugly
well, they
corporate
blame it on the
Republican.
CIA, and like to be
Yeah,
fair,
no,
the CIA does infiltrate these
they're
countries,
so kind of in on it,
yeah.
which is the funny. Well,
But
like I
but
said, it's
but,
not
go,
funny.
but going back to the similarities between a communistic society and a slave society, the slave society is the same way. You can't leave the farm. You're if
Well,
you
th
rebel, you get whipped or killed.
well, think about this.
Mhm.
Because a lot of people would say that the feudal system is also slavery. And I agree. But I think there's a different sort of philosophy that governs the feudal system
Yeah.
and what makes it superior. Because, like, a lot of people would say, you're criticizing all this communism stuff, but then the feudal system is the same thing.
Mhm.
But it's not because the feudal system obviously has Christianity,
Mhm.
right? And when you have the Christian lens of man is made in the image and likeness of God,
Mhm.
right? Then that's where the concept of dignity actually makes
Yeah.
sense, right? And obviously, I know that not every like nobleman or king recognizes that, but it's
Does the
still
word itself, like the etymology of the word dignity, is that somehow related to the word divine?
I wouldn't go that far. Maybe it is, but probably
Maybe.
not.
I don't know. That would be kind of interesting if that were true, though.
It comes from the Latin word dignitatis, right, which means worth, right? Which
Oh.
means you are a human being, therefore you are worth something. You have
Oh.
value,
Oh.
right? And no one can take that away from you because God has given it to you,
Oh, okay.
right? And like I said, not every single king or nobleman understands that. But the understanding, like the school of thought at that time was not like, oh, the king or the nobleman who owns this land and has servants working the land and whatnot. can just do whatever he wants. Like I said, I'm not saying that there weren't people who did that, but the understanding at the time, Michael Knowles explained it really well, was that okay, I am not the top of the chain because God is truly the top of the chain. So whatever I do here on earth, I'm going to have to answer to God.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that is the fundamental difference between that societal system and communism
Yeah.
because communism throws God out the
Well,
window.
because
So anything
uh,
goes. You
yeah,
see what I'm saying?
because in feudalism you have the idea of the divine right of kings, and not only that, but like you have the same religion as your as the peasants. Like if you're the nobleman, you are a Catholic along with your peasants, and
You share the
that
same
and that
community
doesn't mean
faith.
that
Yeah.
like the common people always get treated well, but the problem is that ideally, and in a lot of cases, the nobleman is held to a higher standard. He's held to the standard that Christ set, and in like the traditional Western like culture, we're a guilt culture. We're
Yeah.
not really a shame culture, and that's like we're not really a shame culture. Like you don't do some most Westerners like don't do good things or bad things because they feel like other people are going to shame them into doing them. They feel they do good or bad things, or they like if they like most Westerners, like if they do something bad, they kind of like internalize it because we're an individualistic society.
Right.
Because
Which, mhm.
his how'd it go? Like the pagan idea of like you like owning your wife and children to the where you can kill them was destroyed by Christianity. That's when that changed.
Well, because,
Christ
right. Because
introduced,
human rights,
yeah,
right?
because
That's the like because our religion, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers actually understand this, like the concept of human rights only makes sense in Christianity
mm,
because, well, maybe some other religions too, but whatever. Like in like a theistic worldview, with the concept of dignity and that we're made in the image and likeness of God, that's how human rights can
mm,
exist because you are a human made by God and
mm,
you don't because you got to remember a right you don't you have a right because it's good you don't have a right to do a wrong
mm.
right yeah sorry go ahead
Right. So as I was talking about, like in pagan society, you're you're like if you're a man and you have a wife, like your wife is like if you're going to hell, like she's coming with you basically. Like they bury you with your husband. They all your slaves get buried with you. Like when like you're it's like you're the barbarous warlord and other people are extensions of yourself. But with Christianity,
yeah they're almost
with
nothing
Christianity,
yeah
your wife can go to heaven because her love of God is greater than your love of God. And you could go to hell even though you're married, and
right
that and that
because
and that and that
everyone is a person
makes people
yeah
individualistic, and that also fosters the idea of having guilt, which is because you're it's about your relationship with the truth. So when you go against the truth, if you're actually someone who loves the truth and you understand that no one else has a like for example, will your actions and deeds do not send me to hell. My actions and deeds send me to hell.
well, right but also
So it
that
forces me,
yeah
it makes you realize that it is between you and God alone, and you have to make you have to make the right decision. And when you don't, you get a sense of guilt because you didn't make the right decision, and you feel that guilt rather than shame because shame is coming from other people. Like you shaming me because I did something wrong. Like that is something in the Western culture, but like we're driven more by guilt. And let me continue. Um, so the thing is with like the feudalistic societies, a lot of these nobles they would have a sense of guilt, like if they were to do something wrong. And yes, power does make people, it does increase the temptation on that. But there were wonderful kings who took care of their people,
like Saint
and
Louis King of
mhm, of
France
course, and all these.
he would literally wash like like the feet of peasants. He would literally like just help so many like and just countless other
And
things too.
people aren't perfect, but at least in the feudalistic society where people are kind of slaves or whatever, they're at least the ideals, the nobles, the leaders are held to a standard outside of themselves. And the problem is that in communism, there is no God. Christ is not in there. And you don't, the standard you are held to is the one that you set for yourself as a leader so you can be like Lenin and and believe in accelerationism and believe that you're waging a war against reality itself. Because guess what? In his idea, there is no God holding him to a higher standard.
Right. So
And that is
who is to
why
tell him
it's
that he's
evil.
wrong?
And that
Yeah.
is why it's evil. It's chaos.
Yeah. Who is to tell him that he's wrong?
Mhm,
Also, Stalin, who literally starved 6 million
mhm,
Ukrainians. My family was in that.
yeah.
He starved 6 million Ukrainians to death. Who's to tell him that he's wrong?
Mhm,
Hitler murdered and carried out the mass
yeah.
murder of 6 million Jews. Who's to tell him he's
So
wrong?
so
If you
so
chuck God out the
yeah.
equation, then well, just make your own meaning. That's the meaning he came up with.
Yeah.
You know,
It's you make yourself your own God, and when you make yourself your own God, you open yourself up to evil because people are not perfect.
Mhm.
People are not perfect. People can't be perfect unless they join themselves to Christ.
Right? Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, as
Exactly.
Christ
You
says. Yeah.
and if you cannot be perfect unless you follow the perfect man. That is why God came down to us
To
to
set the
love
example.
us, to
Yeah.
set the example.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when you make yourself your own God, you basically surrender your soul to the devil, the evil in the world. And that's why
Yes.
you see these people that set these standards like Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot, even people like
Mussolini,
Mussolini,
Fidel
Fidel
Castro,
Castro's
Che
Che
Guevara,
Guevara.
that asshole.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, they're not their standard is within themselves. Their standard is how will this affect me personally based on the shame from other people rather than having the guilt of I did not I did not I can instead of having the guilt of like, oh, I committed a sin, therefore I need to go back on what I've done. I need to repent. There is no repentance. There
Mhm.
is no repentance in communism. There is no repentance in
Well,
Nazism.
yes, because keep in mind, remember what Hegel taught and ultimately what Plato taught. It's about like achieving like the euphoria,
Mm.
right? It's about achieving the higher realm. It's about
Because God
transcending reality.
be,
Because this world we have in front of us, this microphone, this computer that we're recording this podcast on, your flesh, my flesh,
Mhm.
that's not good enough.
Yeah.
It's not a
Yeah.
gift from
Yeah.
God. It's
The
evil.
material
It's
world is evil.
gross.
It's Gnostic.
Yes.
It's the material world is evil. It's Gnostic, and also where was I going with this? The that the Garden of Eden can be created by man on this earth. That we do not need God to basically construct the Garden of Eden for us. That we can
Well, also
by ourselves.
that's also like like going into the biblical teachings. Remember the story of the Tower of Babel,
Hmm.
right? And that's we can see that today. Just
That's a wonderful thing to bring up.
right because people trying to get to heaven just by the means of man,
Yeah.
which you can't try to get to heaven, achieve perfection without God,
Hmm.
you know.
And one thing I want to say, this is a little caveat, but my great grandfather was in the 101st Airborne, and he this will tie back into our topic, but uh anyways, my great grandfather served in the 101st Airborne in World War II. He was in the Filthy 13 or Dirty Dozen. His name was Jack Agnew, and he served with Jake McNeese, McNasty. They're the guys. If you, I don't know how many of the people know, but they're the guys with the mohawks and the Native American face paint. Anyways,
Oh yeah, you had that really
he
cool painting.
I
Yeah.
don't know if he was one of the people, but he was near the he served alongside the only Americans to liberate a concentration camp.
Yeah.
And he actually had a lot of photos of these people, and these people were sticks. And the reason why I say they're sticks is because my grandmother, when my great grandfather's daughter, she saw some of these pictures, and she was horrified. And to lessen the trauma of that, my great grandparents told her that those were not real people, that those were stick people. So my grandmother would, I mean, I don't know if that's the best way to do that, but the thing is that
Yeah.
that these people were stripped of their humanity and they were literally starved to death. And this is what these ideologies promote. And
It is, you know what it is?
mhm,
It's anti-human.
mhm.
But
Well,
but you know
it's
that's the funny thing
mhm,
because these leftists and the people in that camp,
mhm.
obviously we're not trying to identify like ourselves as like in opposition to them as like conservatives because we have a lot of problems with the conservative movement.
Yeah,
We'll talk about that in another episode.
yeah,
But they have this perception that like we're anti-human, you know, like the
yeah,
mean, evil, ugly corporate Republican man who's destroying nature for profit, who goes to all these wars for profit, you know, who has no, who's not in touch with the common man, who can't have no sex because he's cringe and he's above, you know, he don't know about the real
yeah.
world. And then also like it's like what's what was I
Keep
talking
keep
about?
going. It's all right. Keep going.
Like it was the like wait, what was I just talking about
You were
with
talking
like
about medieval corporate Republican man and how Christians dehumanize
oh yeah, how they
people.
think well also they think that like
Mhm.
us, like the Christians, they think we're like the
We
dehumanizing, like
don't care.
we're the
We
unnatural.
don't care about the woman who is having pregnancy complications that wants to abort her child. Like
Yeah,
we
or
don't
like
care about them at all.
oh yeah, like
Allegedly.
oh you're against sex before marriage. That's unnatural. Yeah, like they
Yeah.
think that we're like the well also that comes from Nietzsche,
Yeah.
retard,
But
who like oh
yeah.
that's the you know he's like that's unnatural, right? Yeah, and so like they think that we are like the unnatural, like oh we can just kill people because you know they're quote unquote heretics just because oh God said it,
What?
but it's like no guys, you don't understand that like we've been saying
Mhm.
the true anti-humans or sorry anti-humanists,
Yeah.
as Jay Dyer points out, are the atheists
Well, that
because
and the anti-natalism too.
it's because
But
atheism leads to
mhm. So,
anti-natalism,
so
right? But so when you see that and you just see and also that's related to the like all the death metal and the heavy metal, you see the album covers for those things, it's atrocities, it's the most anti-human like things you could possibly imagine because
yeah.
you got to remember like our nature isn't evil, our nature is good
Hmm.
because God made it,
We're made in the image of God,
right?
and
This right.
to the only way to heal. Everybody is broken. Everybody has insecurities. Everybody has issues. The only way you can heal that is to follow God. When I sin, I went into confession not too long ago,
Yeah,
and I was talking to the priest, and I said, Father, I'm afraid of death.
you said that.
Yeah, I'm usually not afraid of death because I believe in God and I try to do good, and it's up to God of whether I go to hell or not. But recently I've been afraid of death, and he's like, you are committing the same sin over and over and over again, and that is damaging to your soul. And you have to try your hardest not to sin. When you resist the temptation, when you pray, when you try to attach your heart to God, your fear of death is it slowly fades away.
Right, I mean what they taught me at Catholic school with the classic education is we as Catholics, we don't have to fear death.
Yeah,
We shouldn't fear death
yeah.
because we know that that's part of life. It's part of the fall. It is what it is, right? And we'll be with God. We'll be in a better place. Not to say that this world is useless and we should just project it, right? That's the era of the evangelicals and whatnot, right? Like,
Mhm.
of it's just like the world, like evil. Like that's not exactly true. I mean,
Like
it's
the
fallen, right?
best way, the Orthodox they have this magazine. It's called Deaf to the World.
Yeah, no, I
You know,
actually
like
really like that.
yeah, and I like it because it's like it's not saying that the world is evil, but it's saying resist the temptations of the world. To resist the evil in the world. It's
That
not it's
have
not
been brought by the
it's
fall.
not
Yeah.
that you look at a tree and you think that it's evil. Um Wait, how do we explain like because I want to connect Gnosticism back to
So think about this. So it's not to say look at the tree or look at your sexuality of how that's as Yoda puts it in Star Wars, that's crude matter and that's evil. No, that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is that that's fleeting, right? It's going to end.
yeah
The only thing that is not going to end is God.
yeah
So we got to focus on God.
yeah no, but I'm trying to merge the Gnosticism back into our discussion on Marxism
Sure.
and Nazism. I think we should talk a little bit more about Nazism. Um,
Well, I had some questions
yes.
regarding so I know that there's a distinction between fascism, National Socialism, and then Nazism,
Yeah.
right? And so,
They're all related, but they're not exactly the same thing.
right, but so, like, well, I have two questions. The first question is, um, can you be a National Socialist without being a German National Socialist? Like
In
is
the
like
national,
in other words, is National Socialism specifically tied to the German state, like post Otto von Bismarck and all that?
I so I believe it goes. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I am.
We would love to be corrected.
Yes, yes. Uh, well, that's gonna open the doors to a lot of things, but we can have a
Dude,
discussion.
we're
But anyways,
we're two buddies
okay,
just having a
so
podcast here.
Nazism is kind of specifically for Germany. And I believe that Nazis technically are National Socialists. I don't actually believe that I we should put like the video from Tick History in the comments.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, definitely recommend watching him. He's not perfect, but pretty good. Um
he's a good channel.
yeah. So basically from what I gather is that because the Nazis, they were basically the Nazi, I think roughly translates to like the National Socialist Party of Germany. So they were a National Socialist, but Nazi is specifically
Well,
German.
Nazi comes from the German word National,
Yeah,
right, which means
yeah,
national,
yeah.
right?
So
Which is it's Socialista Nacional,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
National Socialist,
um,
right? And what is a socialist?
mhm,
Because a lot of
yeah.
people like the topic of this video and what we wanted to really talk about is like how people can't comprehend how like the Nazism and like the communism are honestly kind of like the same thing,
Okay,
minus like one
yeah.
thing,
So
you
let
know?
me explain. So in Marxism, it's class warfare. So it's poor people versus the middle class and upper class. That is class warfare. You have class warfare in Nazism, but it's through a racial and national lens. You are not part of the nation unless you are part of the Aryan ethnicity.
It's also
And
related
that's
to
the diff-
class,
and
though.
that's the difference. That's the difference between like other National Socialists and Nazis, because
Okay.
Nazis also, you got to remember, Nazis also include a lot of uh like pagan kind
Oh
of idea.
yeah,
No, but I
but
remember
that's to subvert
we had
Christianity.
a
Yeah.
discussion about like Odin is like the god of struggle, because a lot of Nazism has to do, like Mein Kampf, my struggle.
Yeah.
Like Odin is like, I don't know how to explain this. Like,
He's the god of destruction.
mhm,
You got to remember, it's the Gnostic idea of destruction is a form of creation,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like antimatter is matter,
mhm,
right? Like unnatural is natural. Like it's that kind of like over which is kind of now that I think about it related to the concept of like the Calvinistic idea that like God created evil,
yeah.
right? Where it's just like this overarching, like going a step further that just kind of misunderstand, like it's missing the point. But yeah, no, that was really interesting.
So, I want to talk a little bit about Nazism, because we talked a lot about like Lenin um earlier. Uh, you know, Nazism is like National Socialism with a uh like a racial, ethnic, like if you're basically uh the nation isn't necessarily based on your citizenship, it's based on your ethnicity,
Genetics, right?
your genetics.
Which is something you cannot
That's
change.
why they were so obsessed with, racially cleansing, especially from the Jews. And
And this is coming from someone who's partially
yeah.
ancestrally Jewish, right?
Hmm.
Because obviously, the Jews have a super long and rooted history in Germany, right? Because like some Jews thought of themselves as just
Hmm.
like any other person in
Yeah.
Germany,
They were
right?
citizens too.
Yes, exactly. But
But they
then,
weren't part of according to the Nazis, they were not part of the nation. Hence National Socialism.
well, right. But
The
also,
National
you have to
Socialism is
remember.
only for the nation.
Well, also, you have to remember what is the root of the word national, nation.
Hmm.
The root of the word is natus in Latin, which
Ah,
means to be born, right?
like natalism.
Yes, to be born, right? And so a nation means you share a common like blood, you share a common heritage, you share a common genealogy,
Yeah.
right? And so that's why the thoughts, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, like was like if you're Jewish, you're not part of like the pure like German blood,
Well,
right?
not only that, like that's why like the Nazis were like disgusted. It was like a disgust. It was like the Jews are. That's why they like. That's why like in the propaganda, they would depict Jewish people wearing like purple and green clothes because purple and green are like symbols of like being sick.
Yeah, like poison. Yeah.
Like poison, like yeah. So like basically, the Jewish people were infecting the blood, and the blood they believed was the spirit of the nation. Like
Yes, no, and the blood also is like
the
is it
corpus,
is
like
it
the body was the nation, and the body had a like the body came from the blood.
and the blood gives you like a specific kind of like transcendence of like reality, right?
You,
Like it gives
you
you this certain state of mind.
hold up. You know what that's related to probably.
Fascism.
Not only that, no wait, the Eucharist, the body and blood.
Oh, that's right. It's like the
Yeah,
perversion
it's perverted.
of this is my body, this is my blood. Yeah.
Mhm.
And
This
people
is my
realize that
body. Like it's basically like
we're all
this
part
is
of the
this
yes.
this,
Ah,
this
so
is the
true.
blood. This is the blood. We are part of the body, the nation, and if you are not part of the nation, you're not even human. And what does God tell us to do? Love God and love your neighbor. And when you don't, he literally like the second thing he says after love God is to love your neighbor. The Jews were the neighbors of the Germans, and they rejected it's an inverse. Everything that is evil is an inverse
It's
of
just
what
yeah,
Christ taught.
it's just it because you got to remember evil is just defined as a deviation from the good.
Mhm.
But
Yeah. But something I guess that is like extremely evil is a complete reversal.
we got to remember nothing's a complete reversal because that gives evil too much credit because you got to remember evil isn't like
It can't overpower.
well because yeah exactly
It can't
because
like
God's
the
yeah
like
yeah
the created can't overpower the uncreated.
yes right because you got to remember we're not dualistic we don't believe in the
No.
dialectic right it's not like these two like good
Thank you
versus
for
evil
the clarification.
yeah but so my second question is isn't fascism like well it's kind of two questions so the first question don't answer before I ask the second question so the
Mhm.
first question is fascism specifically tied to the modern Italian state and then also weren't the like the German National Socialists weren't necessarily fascist right
I don't believe they were technically fascist. Um, no, but let's hear me out. So a big reason why the communists call the Nazis fascist is because the communists were mad at
well
wait, wait, wait,
well
wait, wait.
okay
That
sorry sorry
the communists were mad at Mussolini because Mussolini was a Marxist. Mussolini was a Marxist. He became a fascist, and that's why.
but
And the
no
communists
but
fought against the Nazis, so
sorry
they view and Mussolini and Hitler were together. That's why they call the Nazis fascist.
but why do the communists view the fascists as like heretics, quote unquote? Is it because they don't believe that all nations are equal? Or
Because
like
you got to remember
how does that
that
work?
like the Comintern, I believe it is, like basically it's the worldwide revolution, the international socialist revolution, the Comintern, the USSR, uh the Lenin, the Stalin. I know Lenin and Stalin, they didn't agree on everything, and I know that they weren't exactly the same, but they were part of the same government, the same system in a way.
Yeah.
And basically, because like after World War II, you know, the Soviet Union created the Warsaw Pact, and they wanted to create this international socialism to where the entire world was united. And what happened was,
Similar to Islam, interesting
yeah,
enough. Yeah.
yeah, we'll get to that later. But
Yeah.
so what's interesting about that is that Mussolini was a Marxist. I forget the reason why he decided to change. I think it had to do with like some like personal
Yeah,
issues,
was it convenience? Like what?
probably.
Because going back to what we were saying with the point of making this video is that this whole right wing and the left wing, which we'll go into the origins of that in a second, like these people really aren't really that much different, right?
Yeah,
When you look at their lives, like you explaining with Hitler and Mussolini, with having that kind of like millennial mindset of
yeah.
like the I'm an artist. I'm like above like
I don't have to do manual labor. I'm above that. I
that's what me, the
I'm
ugly corporate
I'm
Republican man
I am
wants.
saved by what I know and not what I do. So
Gnosticism.
as I was saying is that basically Moon I forget the reason why there was a schism, but it was basically a schism because Mussolini because fascism comes from I think fascio, which is the bundle of
A
sticks,
bundle of
and that comes
sticks.
from Italy. I what's his name? Uh Giuseppe?
Garibaldi?
Not Garibaldi. Um,
That's related to the F word that, we can't really say on YouTube.
what?
Fascio.
Yeah, fascio.
What do you think that's related to? A bundle of sticks that you burn.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? You know
The,
what exactly what I'm talking about, right?
huh? How's elaborate?
The FAGGOTs.
Oh, I'm not following you. Explain.
Fascio. FAGGOT.
Oh,
The Skittles people
oh.
that they used to burn.
No, no, it's a bundle of sticks because it's like
Yes, no, but also like that's you see how like I'm explaining the
yeah,
etymology, right? How it's
yeah.
related to the Skittles people,
Hmm.
right? And the
Yeah.
alphabet people
Hmm.
because they used to burn those people. Remember?
Hmm.
And it was like a bundle of sticks that you burn.
Yeah.
Because you got to remember, like if you see the medieval art, you
Hmm.
see them like they're tied against like a tree or like a log or something, and they burn them. Wait, while you're looking that up, I could use the bathroom. I'm sorry. Entertain
Yeah.
the listeners while I'm gone.
So you know, uh Benito Mussolini was, I guess, the founder of fascism uh, in Italy. But the I'm trying to find the name of the person who is like Giuseppe or it was another Italian uh philosopher who kind of started the process of developing fascism in Italy, and basically the schism between the Marxist and the fascist was uh, I think that Mussolini had some sort of falling out with the other Marxists, and he kind of limited himself to a revolution within Italy rather than for the international socialist revolution. So he separated himself. So he wasn't working with the rest of the revolutionary socialists. So that made the Comintern, the international socialist, very angry because he did not. He basically rebelled against them. He is a counter revolutionary. He rebelled against the rebellion. Um, and another interesting topic I think we should bring up is the social democrats and the uh Mar- Marxists, or like I don't necessarily.
Communists versus social democrats.
Yeah, I think that's a better way of putting it. So, was it after the um
Russian Revolution.
yeah, after the Russian Revolution, it was very violent. Lots of people died, and there was a civil war, and the entire system had to basically
It
be.
was radical and it happened
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, and
fast. Yeah, it was
it's just
chaos.
very chaotic is the best way to say it. And
Yeah.
so, a lot of the communists in Germany, the Weimar Republic, they kind of looked at this, and they kind of split into two different parts. The Social Democrats. Oh, this was in 1919. There was a special council. I forget the name of it, but there's like a council that the communists had in Germany, where basically they stayed like international communists. We want our violent revolution. We want to do it just like how it happened in 1917 in Russia. And then there was your Social Democrats, who their idea was to actually infiltrate the institutions that we have like in a country to slowly degrade it over time. And the
Which I
thing,
think is more insidious.
yeah, it's more insidious because it's more of like
It's subtle. You don't
it's
necessarily notice
also it
it.
requires a lot more lying because like
Yeah.
at least when you see the communist revolutionary horde coming at you, at least they're not your friend. They're not pretending to be your friend.
Well, unless you're the working.
Yeah, but
Well,
you know what I
they
mean.
pretend to be your friend until
So
they realize that you beat your
yeah, but
wife.
like but like this is like where a lot of the communist like scares come from in America, is because these type of people, they do they're social democrats. I mean, Bernie Sanders,
Yeah.
you know they want the same thing as the communists in the end. They want the utopia.
Well, interestingly
On that
enough, like
note,
he's
I need
probably
to use the
the.
restroom too.
Well, like I said, guys. Well, like I was going to say, interestingly enough, he's probably the only Democrat at this point who I would have voted for. Um, and obviously, like I'm not saying that in the sense of like the Democrats all bad, Republicans all good. That's not nearly the ideas we're trying to get at. Because of course, we're Catholic. That's what matters first, right? So we're Catholic first. Political ideology kind of comes second, right? Maybe we don't even get to that, right? Um, and that goes back into the point, like we were saying, um, the difference between like our worldview and the worldview of these evil people is who is God versus what do I know, right? Um, I was telling people how with the how Bernie Sanders would probably be the only Democrat I would vote for at this point. But it's not in the sense of like the Democrats bad, Republicans good, like right
Mhm.
because we don't believe in the dialectic.
Yeah, it's well, like the thing is, like with American politics, is you're forced to choose between the two, and it's like
And it's very yeah, it's very
no,
artificial.
I remember when someone was having a conversation with someone, and I was basically explaining like I kind of view like the Democrats and Republicans as like having they're both liberal in a way.
Well, they both have at least the classical liberal framework,
Yeah, yeah, and like
which you got to remember, liberalism is about maximizing the autonomy of the individual.
yeah,
That's what you have to fundamentally understand.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think if you expand that to every human being, it kind of opens you up to having people who kind of just eat slop all day and
Well, you got to remember,
well, then it leads into
Tom,
libertarianism, which is
right? And we've talked about that. We talked about that on Punk Rocker Street, but you got to remember, like these ideas and whatnot, like they can be good. But Thomas Sowell had a good take where before you apply all of these like before you apply these ideologies to
Mhm.
all of reality, you have to stop and think to yourself, okay, at what cost? Right? Okay.
yeah.
The autonomy of the individual, right, which in the Christian sense, right, that's part of it, right? Because we're not purely collectivistic and we're not purely individualistic,
Mm.
right? There is a sense of, okay, you have a tradition, you have family that you need to honor, you have to continue, but also you are your individual. You have things that only you know. You have thoughts that only you think. You have things that only you like, maybe, right? Like you are a individual person. You are a special person that God designed, right? But so when it comes to this autonomy of the individual, right, it's like at what cost,
Mhm.
right? At cost of other people's well-being or
Yeah,
salvation. You know,
but
that's
yeah,
that.
and that's like a problem I have with libertarianism, where it's like, I mean, it,
Well, because you have to remember, the difference between liberals and conservatives, kind of like in the sense that we think of it in like modern or contemporary politics, is the difference of like human nature,
Mm,
right? So liberals and like libertarians view human nature as like good.
yeah,
Um, Not all, but some view it as like incorruptible in the sense that like, oh, you don't need a government because people can just, they can just govern themselves.
yeah,
Like people like like I've heard people um in certain places, I'm not gonna name where they just say, oh yeah, we don't need governments because like human beings can just figure it out on their own, right?
yeah,
But the conservatives view like that human beings are fundamentally flawed, and
yeah,
some go far as to say that our human nature is evil,
yeah,
right? But then you can see that like there's this kind of point where the two ideologies, like the bell curve, kind of like meets,
mm,
right? Because there's right wing people that view people as like, oh well, we don't need the government because people can just live their lives on their own. They can figure shit out on their own. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps,
yeah,
right? And then there's the liberal left way of full autonomy, no government. Of oh yeah, people are good. They need to figure out on their own,
mm,
right? Like you see how like a lot of people don't understand how like these things are related and like
mhm.
they're not like
Yeah,
these opposite, like, because you got to remember we don't believe in the dialectic.
yeah.
This is a fundamental thing.
This kind of reminds me of like, this brings up like interesting. After we talk about this, I want to go back to our main topic here. But
Sure.
I had this conversation with my father, and like we were talking about like how in schools they like promote things that are just kind of, degenerate.
Like what, for example?
You
Because
know,
you
like
got to remember, I never went to public school. I don't
I
really
went to
know
public school. They promote like critical theory. Not just like,
critical thinking.
no, critical theory, like critical race theory,
Oh,
critical
critical
gender
race theory.
theory.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you're
They
saying.
like teach about, abortions
That it's
and
good.
they don't. Well, also depends on the teacher. I mean,
Well, and also you have to remember, like, public education in like the George Bush era is very different than like
yeah.
after, because like you gotta remember when we were growing up, we were kind of, it was like a pro
Ba- ba-
America and thing, but like
basically,
you see what I'm
yeah,
saying, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Like
basically, public schools like encourage things that a lot of people wouldn't really want their children to know. And
yeah,
or
unfortunately.
actually, we were talking about that, but through our conversation, we started talking about, like, my father said something which is very American libertarian, mindset, which is, I don't agree with what other people do, but like they can just go do that as long as it doesn't hurt me. But is that
That doesn't
the
work.
problem is that it will come back and hurt you or hurt someone you love. And
Well, right,
then you have to
because
think about,
sorry, go on.
then you have to think about, should these things be illegal? Should they be legal? Like,
Well,
should we give,
that's actually a debate that's been in Western civilization for like
yeah,
centuries and even a millennium of like,
and
should sin be illegal? It's
yeah,
like, well,
yeah, I don't,
some sin is more serious than others,
yeah,
and also
and
it's like, yeah,
I don't know how, I don't know what to say about that, because like obviously,
and you guys gotta remember, this is just our perspective.
like
If you really
yeah,
want to, I would really recommend, like we were recommending to certain people in the comments sections of our Orthodox video, of just if you're really curious about this or you really want to know, just talk to a Catholic priest,
Yeah.
because they are an office that is higher than us,
Yeah.
right? Like just like they've made certain vows, they've done like certain studies, like
Well, also
th-
there's the ritual and spiritual aspect of it.
well, they've received a sacrament that we have
Mm,
not received,
yeah.
right? So they haven't received an indelible mark on their soul
Yeah.
that we have not received,
Yeah.
right? But please continue what you were
So
saying.
you know, I mean, you run into different problems based on like, oh, should we make sin illegal? Like, I think most people agree, like even if you're not religious, like murder should be illegal, but that's also a sin.
Well, right, because it goes in the whole. This is what's actually interesting about politics, because politics is just what it really means is just how things should be run in
Hmm.
society, right? So it's just like, well, okay, this sin, like, you know, truly creates chaos, but this one doesn't, and then just like, oh, well, does all sin create, and it's like, it's an interesting thing to think
No, but
about,
like I think most people like view you know uh obvious. I think most people would agree that like sin, that murder or rape or some other thing should be illegal, but then it gets down to like if you like
Yeah.
if you like use the Lord's name in vain, like
Well,
and
yeah,
also
there used to be blasphemy laws,
yeah, but
and there's,
like it's kind of difficult to like determine like for example, like if you go out and murder like 25 people, like you're probably gonna get the death penalty. Or if
yeah.
you rape someone, you're probably gonna spend the rest of your life in prison. But like if you use the Lord's name in vain, or you like or you're engaged in homosexual acts, like I think most people would agree, like you don't deserve to be executed. But then there's also the part where we as Christians we have to forgive people, even people who do heinous things. So it's very difficult to like to wrap your mind around, like and also there's a thing of using state power and like I'm not a libertarian to where I'm like, oh man, like the government should have no state power. But like the
Right,
thing
because we're not
Mhm.
anti-government,
and
but
and
you
one
need a government.
And one thing I was we actually had this conversation earlier is if you use like for example like Trump, remember how we're talking about like if like there were like for example, I'm not endorsing this at all. This is not something I support, but this is kind of an example just to show um like a fun little like uh like a thought. What would you say? Like just something to think about. There's a certain phrase. But anyways, so like
Food for thought.
yeah, food for thought. Theoretically, like uh, for example, you have a city, and the city is a sanctuary city. Like illegal immigrants can go there, and they're not like harassed by the police because the local laws of that city, um,
Yeah.
the local laws of that city like protect them. And for example, I'm not endorsing this or saying this will happen, but Trump decides we're shutting off the power, and the government
Right.
has the power to do that. Um, and like people who like support Trump are like, yeah, 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 like we should definitely do that. They don't need to be there, whatever it takes to fix our country, yada yada yada. But the problem is what happens when Trump does that for something you support, or what happens when we have a different president, and that precedent has been set. See, that is the issue I have with giving the state a lot of power. It's because
Well,
those things can be
I
turned
mean,
around
well, yes, I
against
mean,
you.
because that's the fundamental argument against.
Like the Overton window, like of what the government's allowed to do. Like there's certain things that the government would do that every single person in the country would be like, what the heck? But if you
Right.
introduce through time, um, like slowly eroding kind of the Overton window of like what's acceptable for the government to do.
Mhm.
And then, because one group of people may get into power, like for example, let's say, the Republicans get into power and they're doing certain things to press a certain their agenda. That precedent has already been set for hypothetically the Democrats come in and great. You push the Overton window and now you have to deal with the other side pushing against you at the same intensity. And like that's not what you really want.
Well, yeah, like I was gonna say. That's the biggest argument against monarchy,
Mhm.
is because it's a hit or miss system. Like if the guy is great, or it's the best form of government, better
Yeah.
than any sort of democracy or republic that ever existed.
Uh-huh.
But if the guy's bad, then it's literally going to descend into like chaos. But
Mhm.
I mean that's just the thing, is that I think people really need to read, even if I don't really attach myself to it in any sense of the word. I'm not really into the tradition of like the Anglo-Saxon kind of, Enlightenment idea of government. People really need to read, like, you know, okay, how is it that our government, like based on the Constitution, is supposed to function? And also, you need to go to the actual roots of Western civilization itself and think about, okay, what is the actual role of government? Because you got to remember, before like monarchs and before, well, I'm not saying there wasn't monarchs before Christianity, but like Greece, like with the democracy and all that, and the republics in Rome, right? Like before all that, and before like the Christian monarchs, like there's been several works done by like Greek philosophers and other philosophers about the role of government. Like, what does the government actually do,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, and that's one thing, like when people are like, well, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, or I'm a communist, I'm a socialist, I'm this, I'm that, I'm this. I'm like, okay, okay, what do you actually want the government to do?
Well, because you got to remember, dude, what most people want is just, which thing do I perceive to allow me to coom the most? That's like what most people believe.
A lot of people, but no, but like
That's what I would say is the
no, but
government.
like if we're really gonna live in a democracy and we're really gonna have everyone's input and all these people come up with these crazy ideas, I'm like, stop attaching yourself to basically a pseudo religion and just tell me what you want the government to do. You want the government to fix the roads. You want them to make sure that people aren't starving in the streets. You want to make sure that we don't get invaded by another country. Like what most people want is very simple.
Well, right, no, but
And we need to stop worrying about I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a socialist, I'm a communist, I'm a
I'm a
fascist. Da, da,
social
da, da, da.
democrat, but no,
Yeah,
but
you
also
need
like,
to focus on what do you want the government to do? And if someone is rising up into power, regardless of the party, if they're aligning with that, yeah, go vote for them.
well, yeah, I mean, I've coworkers who were lifelong Democrats, but they're like, yeah, I mean, Trump, like thinking about what I value and what I want, he emulates what I want,
Mhm,
and I'm gonna vote for him. I don't
mhm.
care if he's a Republican,
Yeah.
right? Because people like like, to an extent, you gotta leave behind like these stupid labels, right? And I feel like when you
Well,
actually
they're
see
pseudo religions.
yeah, an ideology is what if Volta's put is a
Remember,
watered down religion.
and remember, your brother said that we do have blasphemy laws. Well, not
Yeah.
like we pretty much do.
Well, yeah, because the idea of like when people scoff and sneer at the idea of blasphemy laws, it's like, guys, we have blasphemy laws now. Like, you can't say the N word. You can't make fun of the
That's a
skills
hate
people.
crime.
Yeah, that's blasphemy in their eye.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Now I would like to talk about because earlier we were talking about, you know, fascism and communism proper. I
Right.
think now we should talk about kind of like what we see, like your Antifa, your communist like type people here, like in the modern day in America, and like also like we could talk a little bit more about like neo Nazis too. I've actually had a little bit like a personal like experience.
A question for you, actually.
Mhm.
How is a neo-Nazi different than, I guess I can't really say a traditional Nazi, but like a German National Socialist?
Well, a lot of neo Nazis, not all of them, but like when you think of like a stereotypical neo Nazi, they have a certain look to them. Like being a neo Nazi isn't just about like believing in um like National Socialism. It's also like a aesthetic.
Which is,
Like like actually I think you would be able to explain. Like, oh, you want to explain it? I'm gonna explain the
oh,
actual
it's like,
you explain what it like an aesthetic means, and I'll like kind of give the details of the aesthetic.
Well, basically, I think what Robert's getting at, guys, is that the aesthetic in question, that of the National Socialists and the neo-Nazi, it's just someone who's insecure about being a white Christian male, and also
Well,
technically a
not
female, but
not so
also
much about being Christian because you gotta remember,
well, it's just someone who's insecure about being white.
yeah,
I think that's really what it is, right? And they feel like when they look around them and it's just this milk toast suburbia, or in Nietzsche's circumstance, it's just this milk toast Lutheranism,
Lutheran
right?
Arianism, as Take History says.
Right, like, and they feel like something don't feel right. That ain't my real culture, right? So that's why they attach to this like Viking, or like this uh punk rock, or this, like, that's the real culture.
So
Unlike those Christians
so
who take away my
so
masculinity.
a
You
big,
know
yeah,
exactly
a
what I'm
big
saying.
difference is like, Hitler had a similar mindset to punk rockers, but he really wasn't a punk rocker.
What do you mean by that?
Like punk rocker kind of came is kind of more like the actual like culture of like being a punk rocker is kind of post World War II, like 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Well, I think punk rocker is fundamentally revolutionary.
Yeah,
And it's fundamentally anti mean, evil, ugly corporate Republican man.
yeah, but
Right?
like
Like, kind of like you said, like it's rejecting the 50s America
mm,
of like the, you know, I don't want to not have no
al-
sex. Yeah.
also uh where do I go with this? So uh basically a lot of neo Nazis they they have that punk rocker mindset, so they kind of look at you got to remember Nazis also hate capitalism because
Yes,
capitalism
yes.
was invented by the Jews according to them. So was communism. So
Mm.
they believe that like fascism is truly or Nazism is truly for the white man. It was made by the white man for the white man.
But who is the white man?
Well, you gotta remember there's also different types of you
There's
know.
levels, right? Could you go into that, or did you want to talk about
Yeah, I'll
the?
talk about that. I mean, I was exposed to a lot of these groups, and I will admit I was influenced by this heavily. Uh, I didn't really formally join in a group, but I kind of was adopting some of the ideas over time, and and a lot of that came from just insecurity of going to a school where I was the only person who looked like me, and I am
Mhm.
white. I'm 100% white. Um,
Huh, me?
yeah.
Not so much.
Basically, the I guess a lot of like the modern neo-Nazi kind of like your edgy Nazi,
Like, well, what we perceive as like the far right.
the alt right, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, uh, a lot of it is a lot of these guys, they're just like how I was. I mean, I was insecure, I was depressed, and I want
But like, don't mind me asking, like, what were you insecure about? Like, just your own like
because you gotta remember,
stasis, your own manhood. Like, what? How?
I mean,
That's what I would
so
guess. I
so
mean,
what drawed me towards like you know I wouldn't say I was drawn towards Nazism because I couldn't do it because my great grandfather
fought
fought
wars against that.
fought
Liberated my people
yeah
from it. Yeah.
fought my
Thank you
great
for that.
grandfather fought ferociously against the Nazis and he genuinely hated them and he stole Hitler's violin like he
He's
he
got the curses.
and when I was little, my great grandfather, he showed me, like Hitler's eagle's nest platters and all these little things that Hitler owned and interacted with, and he stole it and he hid it under his bed, and he was showing me his great grandson. So I couldn't become a Nazi, but I was slowly being. I got involved in like anti-Semitism and basically just general like racism. So like the idea is that
Mhm.
so like first I'll talk about like my personal experience, which was I went to a school. Most I was in a lot of my classes. I was the only white person, and uh, especially when you're the minority white person, there's no way for you to be cool. It's not that I really desired to be cool, but there's a lot of like hatred of like the black kids would hate me for obvious reasons.
Right, right.
The Hispanic people like now it's different for me because I speak Spanish and
And your
I'm
fiance
my
is Hispanic,
fiance
yeah.
is Spanish, but that
God
time
bless you.
I was not connected to like Spanish culture, so I was just kind like you're the other person, you're the outsider, and I live in America and this country was created by my people and
Right, because you're of like Ulster Irish descent.
Ulster
Yeah,
Irish descent and English and German. So this
yeah.
country, its philosophical also my worldview is very different back then. I didn't believe in God at the time. But anyways,
Right,
the
which I remember you went through like the
which
process.
makes you more susceptible to the ideas. I wonder why. But anyways,
Yeah.
um, so the allure to this ideology is you know you need to have your people. Like where are your people?
Well, right, because I feel like a lot of like because white people, right, which I have a problem with just that ethnonym in general.
Mm,
Like white people, because they feel like their identity has been diluted, like they don't really have anything to be proud of anymore.
mm.
Like this kind of like suburban
So
kind of like milk toast.
yeah.
Like that's why they feel like they need to attach themselves to these like extreme ideologies. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Well, also the other problem is that these ideas reduce your identity to being a certain characteristic. Like it reduces, you're no longer Robert. You are a white man. You are part of the um nation. You are part national. You're a now a national socialist.
Which is ultimately dehumanizing when
Hmm.
you really think about
So
it.
you're no longer
Yeah.
you're no longer an individual, and that's another issue. But anyways, so
Well, right, because you guys gotta remember, individualism still matters. Collectivism still kind of matters. You gotta remember, like in our worldview as Catholics, it's like faith and reason. These seemingly incompatible, opposing ideas, you actually need both and they work in tandem,
Mhm.
right? Like how you can be a traditional person seeing yourself as a continuation of your grandparents, your parents, and this tradition that you've had for thousands of years, yet you could still be an individual, right? It's like it's similar to the concept of the dilemma of like how God can be all loving, yet he allows all these atrocities to happen and he's still all powerful, you know? But he still is, you know,
Yeah,
like it's I think that's really what it's related to.
yeah.
And if you can continue.
So you know, uh, typical typical white boy in a white boy minority setting. The problem is that all the other types of people they hate you because you're the evil colonizer, evil racist white man. And then when I go home, my family is just filled with self hatred of we're white,
We're
we're bad,
evil, we're
we're evil.
boring, we have no culture, we have nothing to be proud of,
Hmm.
which is bullshit.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I mean, you guys got to remember like the concept of white people I don't really agree with in general
Even
because
Caucasian is just
well, right, because white people is just kind of like a hodgepodge of these different European ethnic groups that emigrated to America. Um, like you have to remember, and I really agree with James Stream when we were talking about The Sopranos. Is like if you don't know your heritage, look into it.
mhm,
Ask your parents. Ask your grandparents if they're still alive. Maybe do a DNA test, right? And get in touch with what your roots are. And it's like you have to understand, like white people and like people that are of European ancestry, that is, because I don't, like I said, I don't really like the term white people. It's kind of like a blanket term. It doesn't really mean anything. Like, it's more than, you're more than like powdered wigs and suburbia,
Yeah.
right? Or people being mad and insecure about how your dick is small and you can't have no sex because you're a Protestant Christian. Like, that's
Yeah.
like, guys, look at the roots of Western civilization, look at the specific roots that you have, and you'd find wonderful cultures. Guys, like, if you're English, don't be ashamed of that. If you're like 100% English, dude, you have Tolkien. You have English common law. You have like literally the people that have created the foundation for how our world runs today.
Hmm.
You have Harry Potter. You have sea shanties. You have so much culture. That's why it's bullshit that people like when people do the DNA ancestry and they get like upset about that because oh I'm too English. Like that's not a bad thing,
Hmm.
guys. And I think what you and I have and what I think Christians should have is that because we've like we were talking about earlier, we have the mindset that we're all made in the image and likeness of God. We all have dignity. That's why certain cultures, even if they worship demons or they do these degenerate things, like we will all view them like we'll view them all as valuable,
Hmm.
right? Because God made them,
Yeah.
right? And we'll always be interested in what a certain culture has that's different than ours,
Yeah.
right? I think that's really
Yeah.
the difference
Yeah.
with the Christian worldview.
So I want to kind of uh just as this is kind of like a personal example of, you know, why these ideologies are harmful. And I really like want to like kind of finish
Well, you
like
asked me in the beginning of the
yeah,
show, yeah.
yeah. So I really want to finish this segment here.
Yeah.
So you know, it reduces your identity to being white, and you're not in charge of the National Socialist movement. You're just a cog. You're just there. You feel like these people are your friends and your brothers, but they're really not. They barely know
It's a
you.
fake facade,
Yeah,
yeah.
anyways, so you know, it's just because you got to remember like the National Socialists, or let's go more with like your Nazi, is that, you know, they let me explain the worldview. They don't like um capitalism because it's Jewish. And I forget if it was Marx. No, I think I no, it was Hitler who said this, was that money is the jealous god of Israel.
Hmm.
So money is the Jews' god. I know you have a lot to say about that, but let me finish.
No, but
Yeah.
dude, keep going.
Okay. So, and then communism is also Jewish. I mean, to be fair, like Marx did come from Judaism, and he, you know, self-hating Jew, and I think his grandfather was like a rabbi in
I
German
think his
city.
dad was actually.
Oh, interesting. But anyways, um, so you know,
Well, going back to that
yeah,
self-hatred
yeah, yeah,
mentality, yeah.
yeah. So these people are like, well, this also comes out of the Cold War, where it's, well, the communist, that's from the Jews, and the capitalism, that's from the Jews, and now they're importing all these brown people from the other country, and they're only bringing them into the white countries, and now I live in a neighborhood where I'm the only white person, so the only way, the like, and then when they're exposed to, neo-Nazi propaganda, they're like, man, this is like perfect. They believe exactly what I believe, because I've been seeing that, like,
They believe,
ah,
I think what it is
sorry,
like,
let me finish. So like, man, I've been seeing the problems with capitalism. I see the problems with socialism. I just don't
yeah.
feel like I fit in. And then they're like, man, this is how I feel it. And then you can have the idea of like, oh, I'm like the good guy, the revolutionary. Like
I'm the
I'm
virtuous
like
underdog.
I'm the rebel. I'm the punk rocker.
I'm the one who like recognizes the
Yeah,
evil
yeah,
and rejects it.
yeah.
That's fundamentally what it
And then
is.
and then I'm above the other people because I'm part of the white race. I'm
They've
a
transcended the menial
Gnostic. Yeah,
reality.
exactly.
Yes,
And
going back to
that's
the ultimate point, Gnosticism, what you know,
and it feel
euphoria,
and it isolates you from your family, and it fills your heart with hatred, and it's just not worth it.
right? Because you get to the point
And
where
it
it's
makes
like you can't even have a normal conversation with people.
Mhm.
right? Because that's too worldly. That's too beneath me, you know?
I'm dedicated to the revolution.
Right, and that's how it literally becomes like the perverted inverse religion, right?
And if you look at some of like the darker things that these people do, some of these people are murderers.
I don't think some of them. I think all of them.
I want to say all of them, because you gotta remember, like, there's different levels to how dedicated people are. But like,
Well, okay, yeah, sure,
um,
sure.
some of these people, like I'll hear stories. To be fair, like, are they telling the truth or not? But they're like, yeah, like, I beat up like this black guy for whatever he looked at me wrong, or like there was this really weird,
That's retarded.
like there was this really
It's
like
evil.
weird guy who like he he like he was white and he liked having sex with black women because he liked to like control them and like, but basically he's basically just being a degenerate. Like he was like making fun. He's like
Yeah,
making
yeah.
fun of like black women, and like having like while like having sex with them. He basically like demeaned them by like tricking them into like
Abusing them.
basically, yeah, abusing. And like it sucks because like
Despicable.
and it just sucks because like you're like crazy feminist like weirdo woman like thinks that like people like Will and I are like that. Um,
Yeah,
they
which is
they they
the
think that,
annoying part of the psyop with that you have to kind of deal with. Um, Go on.
so it's just like it sucks because you know what really is like bad about these ideologies with communism and Nazism is it dehumanizes you, and it
Because
makes you
it
dehumanize other people, and it dehumanizes you because you are no longer an individual. You're no longer made in the image of God. You are a part of. You are a cog. And the thing is, okay, in capitalism, like you are a cog of like a
well,
corporation,
of
but at
course,
least you
yeah.
have the possibility of creating your own business, and you can make it the way you want.
Yeah, and you
And
can
yeah,
leave
and
the
yeah, I know.
corporation and find another job
Yeah, and,
potentially.
and, I know that
And
like
guys, you must understand, we're not like defending. Oh, that's not real capitalism. Like,
yeah.
no, 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 that's not what we're doing.
So and look, Will and I are both in our early 20s, and we both don't make a lot of money, and I get it. I understand. I
We're a
understand.
bunch of artists.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, we're
May,
trying to make
may,
that intellectual.
maybe we should join the movement, join the revolution.
Join the punk rocker.
Yeah, maybe we should, get the big ass mohawk and put on the boots and walk around and go
You know,
go into DC and like
smoke
protest
weed,
Trump for
snort
being,
cocaine.
yeah,
He's a fucking fascist.
yeah, like that's what, like, we're artsy, well, I mean, you and I both work blue collar jobs though, so I guess we can't be.
Well, yes, but
Wait, but
also
we're the working class, so.
yes, but also you have to remember
Oh,
that
we're white, so
doesn't
and
really.
we're Catholic, so.
But you have to remember that ultimately doesn't really matter because you have to remember at the end of the day, God, like even if people are held to higher standards, God still like as we remember because we're in carnival time, baby. I'm from New Orleans. We're in carnival time, baby. Which leads into Ash Wednesday, remembering that we are ashes and into ashes we will return. Basically, just kind of like as a way to humble ourselves, realize that in the grand scheme of things, we're really not that much, even though we kind of are, because God made us and He loves us. But I digress.
Mhm.
The whole point is that, like, wait, what was I just talking about?
Talking about carnival time
Right
and
before that, with
like
the
Ash Wednesday and, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening.
but like right before that, what was I talking about? Like the punk rocker and
I don't know. But I have kind of a final, if it's all right with you, I have like a final.
shit. I'm trying to remember what I
It's
was
all right. Well,
saying.
think about what I'm talking. So like kind of like the final thing I have to say is you know I understand it's like difficult out there, and I understand like there's a lot of
Confusion.
yeah, there's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of propaganda, but like the only way out of this is to realize that there is a standard which is projected upon all of humanity, and that standard is the truth, and that standard is Jesus. And and I wasn't always a Christian, and I understand it's difficult, but I've encouraged, if you're listening to this, just look more into it, and if you're inclined, pray. But if you are involved with one of these ideologies, I just um I I should pray. I should pray for
Yeah.
everyone. And what I can say is like I fell into some of these ideas, and it kind of feels fun at first, but like how does it help you? How does it help you um to hate another person on a characteristic that they can't change? And I know that
Yeah. Yeah.
like with communism, it's like, oh, it's the poor versus the poor versus the
It's the poor working class
Mhm.
man who has the six pack abs,
Mhm.
who's the Chad, who's just trying to help his wife
Yeah,
and kids
yeah, but like
against the evil,
yeah,
mean evil of
yeah.
the corporate
So
America who would never
yeah,
understand that struggle.
yeah. But you know, uh, kind of, I'm American, so I'm gonna speak for more for like what's going on in America. It's like
Yeah.
either side of what you're on, like to dehumanize other people, you dehumanize yourself, and
Yeah.
it's just being a collective sometimes is good. Being an individual sometimes is good, but
You
you
need
you
both.
don't you
Yeah.
don't need to become a hyper libertarian and be like, oh man, just do whatever you want, because there's no, it's like how can you, it's like man, that person, like they could just cut themselves open with a knife, and they can just do whatever they want, whatever
Oh, and
makes
if
them
I
feel.
intervene, that's bad.
Yeah, but then also like
The inverse, the
yeah,
other side of the spectrum is like
you
hyper collectivism,
yeah,
you
yeah, and,
know?
and you need to
Yeah.
like control every aspect. Neither one of those things are love.
No, and neither one of those
Mhm.
things is true because you got to remember when it comes to even when you like bring it into like the theological domain of like, okay, am I governed by emotion or or faith or reason, right? It's like you're not one or the other. You need both, right? You need like both emotion and faith, right? And reason. They work in tandem. They work in harmony. And I think it's the both. Like when people like feel like they're just kind of like they have nothing to be proud of. They just live in this milk toast like suburbia. Like everything is cringe. They feel insecure. It's like you have to remember. Well, first of all, that's not your culture. That's made up by the CIA. And then also you have to remember, like, no, you know what? I am an individual, but also I am part of a collective. I am part of a people. I am part of a family. I'm part of a tradition. And
A
that
nation.
matters, yes, and that matters just as much as my individualism, right? And that's
And
why,
you
like,
don't want to idolize either one. You don't want to idolize
yes,
being an individual.
exactly. No, exactly. And that goes back into my point about Aristotle,
Mhm.
right? About why I respect him the most out of all the Greek philosophers because he talks about the problem of the excess and the defect, right? Because when you excess discipline, it gets into this whole pride, like, you idolize the like, I can do this over other people, right? And that's a problem. But when you have the defect of discipline, where you get so lazy, you get so tolerant, you get so permissive of your vices and other